Hello, I'm Patti from Fire Mountain Gems and Beads. I'm a jewelry designer here, and today I'm going to take you through making this beautiful hand-knapped obsidian and amethyst necklace. The first thing I'm going to do is create the Naja focal. And we'll do that by wrapping it with about a foot of this 22 gauge sterling silver filled half hard round wire. And I'm just going to cut off about a foot, maybe just a little bit more. I like to have a little bit extra. And then I'm just going to make a good sized wire wrapped loop at the top of that, and that's going to be my bail. So I'm just going to wrap the wire around the shank of the pliers, and then I'm just going to use my fingernail to make a bend in the wire. So you end up with this shape that's like a lollipop on a stick with this tail coming out the side. Then I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers, or you could use flat nose pliers too. And I'm going to clamp half of that circle, just like that. And I'm just going to push the tail around as far as it will go to the other side. And then I'm going to put the pliers in my non-dominant hand and clamp really tight. I want to really get a good hold on that loop. And then just using another pair of pliers, you can use bent nose like this, flat nose, or even a round. I'm going to wrap this several times around. Nice and tight, the coils right up against each other. Just kind of squish that out of the way. Okay. Then I'm going to take my flush cutter and take the outside of my flush cutter against the piece that I'm keeping, and I'm going to nip it nice and tight. And I'm going to put my thumb over that tail so it doesn't fly up into my face. Really important, you always cover your tails before you cut them off so they don't fly. Okay. Then I'm going to take my chain nose plier, and I'm just going to gently in a circle go around, squeezing around and making sure that that tail is nice and tucked in. Okay, so this is what you're going to end up with, a wire wrap loop at the end of your wire. Next, I'm going to take the bottom of the coil on that loop and put my fingernail there, and I'm just going to make a little bend in it so it's kind of like this. So the tail's coming off to one side. And then I'm going to take my Naja element. You see there's a little hole there. That's if you want to put a jump ring through or an ice pick bail or something like that. We're not doing that today, so I'm just going to go right over that and ignore it like it's not there. You're not really going to see it at the end. And I'm going to center my loop right over that hole. You can see how that is, right over the middle, and I'm going to kind of clamp that with my thumb against the Naja. And then I'm going to wrap the wire fairly snugly, like 2 times on one side of the coil. So I end up with a couple of wraps on one side. Then on the back side of my Naja, I'm going to cross it over like this, and I'm going to wrap twice on the other side of that loop. Try and keep them fairly snug. You're going to take up some slack later, so don't worry about it being perfect, but we want to keep it kind of tight. Let's see here. And we don't want them crossing over each other on the front. If they're going to cross over each other, we want that on the back. Okay, so once I have 2 more wraps, so I've got 2 on either side of my loop, I'm going to take the tail of the wire and I'm going to wrap it around the base of that wire wrap loop a couple of times. Twice is good. And then on the back of the piece, I'm going to terminate it there. I'm just going to take my cutter and cut off the tail. And then I'm going to take my chain nose plier and I'm just going to tuck that tail in so it's not sticking out. Okay, so there we've got our back with the crossover and we've got our front. I'm going to space these out just a little bit with my fingernail because the next thing we're going to do is make some bends, some decorative bends in the wire. You can see how on the finished piece here we've got some kind of random bends. There's no specific way to do this. You can just pick where you want them. Pick up your chain nose plier with a fairly fine tip like this and just choose a wire and make some bends in it. It's really random, just whatever you think is going to look nice. And this takes up some of the slack in the wire as well. And you can kind of push them apart with your fingernails so you can get in there. You don't want to go too hard against the Naja. You don't want to scratch the stone, and you don't want to squeeze the wire too hard because you don't want to mar up the wire. You see how I'm just kind of randomly choosing where to make some bends. I'm going to make a couple of more here toward the bottom. Kind of separate these wires out a little bit. Sometimes it takes a little finesse. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little copper accent around the neck of this wire wrapped loop here. It's really great to use mixed metals like this. It gives it so much more interest in the piece. So I'm going to take some 20 gauge wrap-it wire here. It's copper. I'm going to cut off just like 5 inches, something like that. And then starting at the back of the Naja, and you'll know the back because it doesn't have the bends in it and it has the crossover. I'm going to just kind of anchor the wire against the Naja with my thumb of my non-dominant hand. And then I'm just going to wrap around and make several wraps right on top of each other, nice and tight, like that. Then I'm going to take my flush cutters and I'm just going to clip off those tails. And the last thing I'll do is take my chain nose pliers and just kind of massage those tails around in a circular motion, squeezing as they go around just gently, and making sure those tails are nicely tucked in. You don't want any sharp edges. So then you have your Naja focal element. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and set that aside. And let's look at this necklace as a whole. So you can see here that we've got multiple sections. We've got a center section here that we're going to start with. And then we've got 4 identical sections, 2 on each side. So I've actually made some of these sections up because it is just a repetitive process. So we're going to do the center one. I'm going to show you how to make one of the side ones, and then we'll connect the ones that I've already made. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is we'll take some AccuFlex. This is 49 strand 0.019 AccuFlex. I like to cut a little extra, so I'm going to cut 8 or 9 inches for each one of these sections. So with my AccuFlex section, I'm going to go ahead and grab one of these great little AccuGuards. You can see it looks like a little horseshoe. It's got holes on either side. And we're just going to thread it through one of the holes. And then up and down through the other hole. And pull it tight so the AccuFlex is right in the groove of this AccuGuard. Then I'm going to grab one of these little copper circles. and thread that into the little bend of the AccuGuard. Then I'm going to take my crimping pliers, they're really handy for doing this, and I'm just going to close that AccuGuard kind of around it. Just like that. So it kind of closes in on itself. And then we will thread a crimp bead onto here. And make sure it goes through the other tail of the AccuGuard. So it is over both tails. And then we're going to make sure that the AccuFlex is nice and tight in the AccuGuard. I'm just going to kind of clamp that with my thumb and forefinger. Then I'm going to take my crimpers and kind of grab the crimp, and then I'm going to pull it up. Make sure I've got it in the groove properly there. I'm going to pull it up about 1 millimeter from the AccuGuard and then crimp it nice and tight. Then I'm going to take the outside groove of the crimper and squeeze that together. And then I like to kind of take the edge of the crimper for security's sake and squeeze it again. So it's really a nice tight crimp. Then I'm going to take my flush cutters and I'm going to cut the tail off of that AccuFlex really close, right up against the crimp. Okay. The next thing I'll do is put my crimp in the outside groove of my crimper, put it right over the crimp, and then close it up. Nope, that one didn't work. If you bend one of these crimps, it's done, so get a fresh one. I'm going to put it over my crimp, make sure it's really nice and tight over that, and close it up. And you kind of massage around, and you can use your chain nose too to do that, and you want it to form a nice little ball. See, I've got my wire in the crimp cover, so I'm going to kind of grab the crimp cover with my thumb and forefinger and pull that wire and see if I can dislodge it, because I don't want it to be within the edges there. That's better. And then I'll close it up. Next, I'm going to thread on some of the end elements here. We've got a silver rondelle, a copper rondelle, and then a black rondelle. So we'll just thread those on. Okay. And then we've got a couple of the hand-knapped amethyst. And I really like to take these and look and see where the holes, because they're so irregular, the hand-knapped. They've got a great, beautiful, natural rough look, but they're all different. And I want the holes to be where they'll go together and not really be showing any of the AccuFlex after I thread them. So we'll thread on one of the hand-knapped amethyst, and then a second. And then I just want to check the connection between the two and make sure there's not a lot of AccuFlex showing. You see how these butt up nicely against each other? That's what you want. Okay, so we've got 2 of the amethyst threaded on. Then we're going to take our Naja element and thread right through the bail of the Naja. Then we're going to get another hand-knapped amethyst, thread that on. And then one more. And before I finish up, I'm going to check the connection between all of those and make sure that I feel like it looks right. I'm not seeing a lot of acuflex. It looks really good. Okay, I'll finish that up by threading on one of the black rondelles, or these are actually hishis. Hishis have this more of a sharp edge. Then the little copper flower rondelle and one of the silver rondelles. Like that. And then a crimp bead. Whoops, we lost that one. Put a crimp bead on. There we go. And then an AccuGuard. So we put it through one side of the AccuGuard, then we're going to go through the other side of the AccuGuard. And pull it nice and taut so the AccuGuard is, or the AccuFlex is right up against the bend of the AccuGuard. Then we're going to take another copper element and thread that on. And then before I tighten up my AccuFlex, I'm going to put the end of the AccuFlex through the crimp bead. And I might actually go through one of the rondelles too. Sometimes a little secret to this is going through a bead if you can, if there's space, and that hides the tail of the bead. Okay, so I want it pretty tight. I'm going to go ahead and close up my AccuGuard here with the outside of my crimper. There we go. And so I want enough space left on the AccuFlex so I'll be able to put a crimp cover in there. So I don't want it too tight in there, but I don't want it too loose. So you just have to kind of eyeball it. And you want a little space on either side of the crimp. Then I'm going to go ahead and crimp that closed. And then with the outside of my crimper, I'm going to round that out. There we go. Sometimes from a couple directions, you want it to fit within the crimp cover. Make sure I feel that's a nice secure connection. You don't want it to come apart later. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and put my crimp cover on. I'm going to grab that with the outside of my crimper. And then put it right over the crimped bead. I want to make sure it's on there really straight. And the crimps kind of get wonky sometimes, so it takes a little bit of finessing. But it's worth the extra time to make sure it gets on there straight. Sometimes you just have to take it and go from a different angle. Okay, I feel like it's on there really well. I'm going to close that up. I'm going to go around and just round it out a little bit. I kind of like to use my chain nose pliers to do that. I feel like I have more control. You just want the crimp edges to kind of come together and to form a nice little round ball. Okay, so I've got that really nicely crimped now. I'm going to go in against my rondelle, making sure that I don't cut the piece that I want to keep, and cut off the tail. So here I have the middle section of my necklace all set. And I have made some pre-made sections, so you can see I've already strung this side, and we'll attach that in a minute. And so I already have this completed section here, which is, you can see, just the same. I didn't want to have to thread them all for you on the video because it's the same process. And I'm just going to take that completed section and thread it on to the AccuGuard. And then I'm going to take the tail of my AccuFlex and go through the crimp bead and then maybe one of those rondelles. You could go through more if you want. Okay, and then I'm just going to pull it taut. So I take up all the slack in the AccuFlex. And I'm going to close up that AccuGuard with the outside of my crimper. It's nice and tight. And I'm going to take up all the slack. Then I'm going to leave a millimeter on each side of the crimp bead. I'm going to pull it out a little bit and give it a little slack. So I'll be able to get my crimp cover in there. That's really important. You don't want too much, but you don't want too little. Just a millimeter on either side. Then I'm going to crimp that bead really tight. Round it out with the outside edge here. Maybe go around a little bit in a couple directions so I can get my crimp cover on it. And then I'm going to check that connection, make sure it's nice and tight. And then put on the crimp cover. Close that up. Kind of massage it into place so it feels really good with my chain nose pliers. And then I'm going to take my flush cutter and cut off the tail, being really, really careful not to cut the threading wire that you want to keep. There we go. So you have one side of your necklace complete. Now I've already created the other side. All I need to do is thread on a crimp bead first. We need that. Then thread on an AccuGuard. Thread it on one side. There we go. Thread it through the other side. And then I'm going to attach that right to my necklace. Oh, you know what? I didn't close up my AccuGuard, and if you don't close up your AccuGuard, you end up with a lot of space here and it's harder to work with. So, close up my AccuGuard, and that brings the AccuFlex set nice and closer together so you can get a good fit. There we go. Okay, take up all that slack, back it off a little bit, leave just a millimeter on either side, and then crimp that, and then close in the crimp. I'm going to go around a couple of times just to make sure it's kind of rounded out. And then I'll grab a crimp cover. And slide the crimp cover in there and make sure it's nice and straight. Close that up. Okay, and then cut off this tail, making sure not to cut the wire that I'm keeping. I want it nice and close. Okay, so we've got our necklace put together. Oops. The last thing we need to do is add the clasp. Now you can have a couple of these round components at this end and put the clasp on those. I decided for the design element to make it just a bit shorter, not to have them on this one, so I took them off. Okay, so we'll grab this great little matching clasp and a couple of these small silver jump rings. And I am just going to clamp half the jump ring in my chain nose. And then I like to flip over my bent chain nose and open it up like that. And we're just going to clasp right onto the AccuGuard on this one. So you notice I opened my jump ring sideways, and then I'm going to close it back the same direction that I opened it sideways. And I'll rock it back and forth and make sure I have a nice tight connection. That's really important. So there you have one half of your clasp. I'll grab another jump ring. Open that up sideways. Put on the T-bar for my toggle clasp here. And go right on the other AccuFlux and the other AccuGuard. And I'm going to close it up the same direction that I opened it. And then I'm going to rock it back and forth a little bit just to make sure there's a nice tight connection. And that goes right through. And there you have your beautiful hand-knapped necklace. Well, thank you for joining me today to make this beautiful necklace. Make sure and visit our website for more tutorials on all kinds of different jewelry and techniques. We'd love to have you.